I call the honourable member Gareth Hughes. Tēnā koe, Mr Hughes.
Kia ora, Mr Speaker. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou kia ora. I rise to speak and oppose the Telecommunications Interception Capability Bill introduced by the so-called Communication Minister, but I think she's going to get a name for herself as the Minister of Communication Interceptions, Mr Speaker. This is a bad day for our democracy, Mr Speaker. It's a bad day. We're seeing this in its sibling legislation, the Government Communications Security Bill legislation, also introduced into this chamber today under urgency in a constrained select committee hearing period with no Bill of Rights Act vet, no regulatory impact assessment, and introduced under urgency. Mr Speaker, it's a bad day for our democracy because I don't think this is the standard Kiwis expect from a government that takes human rights, civil liberties, that takes security issues seriously, demands. Mr Speaker, what we're seeing is bad legislation being introduced under urgency. Mr Speaker, I received this in my office today. It's dated yesterday. It's a letter from the Minister of Communications, Amy Adams, with the legislation. The day it's tabled in Parliament, the opposition gets to look at this legislation. That's not in the spirit of cross-party approach that we've seen over decades when it comes to security and surveillance issues, Mr Speaker. I think it's a bad day and reflects very poorly on the government. I think the tone of this debate reflects very poorly on the government benches, who aren't speaking more than 1 minute, except for a few bland comments. Mr Speaker, they should be able to stand up and defend this legislation in the House in front of this people, put their words down on the record of our country in the Hansard, Mr Speaker. This is the party that boasted so boldly and loudly about the nanny state. This is the party that ridiculously talked about Fiji and North Korea when we talked about lower electricity prices and housing affordability. Mr Speaker, if we're going to have a conversation about Fiji and North Korea, let's look at the legislation in front of this Parliament today. What we're talking about, and let's remember what we did last session in Parliament, criminalising protest activity. Mr Speaker, if there's things that remind me of totalitarian governments, it's things like spying on its citizens, it's things like retrospectively changing the laws when the government's been found to have used its agents to act unlawfully, it's criminalising protest activity. Mr Speaker, I think it's a bad day for the government when we're dealing with issues such as this. They call it necessary and transparent, but there's no justification, there's no case that they can point to, there's no cross-party process that they've gone through to build support, as would have been the case in the past. Mr Speaker, this is a large expansion of power. It deals with the interception capability of ISPs and other network operators. It deals with a differential escalating role of monitoring and compliance regime. It's got a penalties regime contained. Mr Speaker, I don't think the ICT or the telecommunications sector will be welcoming this. I doubt they were consulted. We still haven't got a mention from the government benches if they were or not. I think they'll be concerned. I think they'll be concerned because it's going to risk investment in this critical sector, and I believe an important part of our economic prosperity going into the future. There's even risks around whether these companies can be sold in the future or not. Hey, if we're going to have a conversation of nanny state, let's just look at this bill in front of the House today, Mr Speaker. This bill contains an extremely wide definition of what security is and what can be surveilled as a consequence. It uses the term economic well-being, a catch-all, which could catch anyone from Greenpeace to a protester with a banner to the Green and Labour parties when we talk about excessive super profits in the electricity sector and trying to drive down power bills for Kiwis. Mr Speaker, I think crucially, and what Kiwis find so unfair and egregious about this bill is what we've seen over the last 18 months is a monumental cock-up when it comes to .com, a monumental cock-up. And what this government has done is rewarding those spies for their unlawful activities. It's rewarding the spies for their bad behaviour. It's changing the rules to validate what they did. Mr Speaker, we may as well get Jetstar to write our customer service standards. We may as well get John Banks to run our electoral donation register if we're going to get the spies the laws they want when they act unlawfully. Mr Speaker, it's bad for our telecommunications, it's bad for our human rights. It's passed through our Parliament in a poor, shoddy process with no Bill of Rights vet. There was a regulatory impact statement produced in March the 12th, I understand. That's not in front of this House. Terrible process, shoddy process. It smacks of Muldernism, and I think the members should be ashamed that they're voting for it. I say that with all honesty, without a sense of rhetoric. This is a shameful day, Mr Speaker. We've seen a litany of terrible legislation under this Parliament, but geez, this has got to take the cake. Laws to spy on Kiwis, to validate unlawful spying on Kiwis under urgency. A bad day for this country, Mr Speaker, a bad day for the National Party.
I call the Honourable Member Scott Simpson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to